I was at a whiskey festival in Edinburgh, Scotland, and a little lady walked up to me and said, "As a Scot, I am so proud of the Scotch whiskey industry, its heritage, and what it's meant to our country. Why aren't you Americans as proud of your bourbon?" And I can only tell her, "Ma'am, that's a long, long story."
The state of Kentucky, the vast majority of it is dry. And that always amazes people when I'm out around the world when you tell them 95% of the world's bourbon's made in Kentucky and 75% of the state, it's illegal to have a drink of whiskey.
Come down off of that mountain, come down all you men.
Bourbon is the quintessential defining aspect of Kentucky culture. It is at every Kentucky event, whether it's the Kentucky Derby or it's at a get-together watching March Madness, it's always present.
There's a long, long culture and history that kind of wraps itself around bourbon in Kentucky.
I think in general, like westward expansion, most of our beautiful sort of literature, some of our famous cities, all owe them maybe a small part, or sometimes a large part, to Kentucky bourbon.
You're drinking history when you drink bourbon.
Bourbon is as part of the Kentucky character as anything I can think of.
People recognize, they know Kentucky. Oh, you're from Kentucky, Kentucky bourbon. It's not thoroughbred horses, it's Kentucky bourbon that's putting Kentucky on the map globally.
We took whiskey, evolved it from the Celtic style, the Scotch-Irish style, and evolved it into what is today the last style of whiskey to emerge from culture, and that is bourbon whiskey.
The impact that the bourbon industry has had on Kentucky has been, I don't even think you can measure it.
The state textbooks will talk about slavery, talk about tobacco, coal, will cover the history of the Commonwealth, but they don't mention bourbon, like we don't exist.
The thing is, bourbon is part of what Kentucky's all about.
You know, the first constitutional crisis was the Whiskey Rebellion. Prohibition was another huge, important part of American history.
There's something about bourbon and whiskey that brings tales of the Wild West or the frontier, the pioneer settler like we had here in Kentucky. And it's just very authentic. And I think that's what some of the mystique is about it, because it has such a rich history and heritage.
Probably happened about 200 years ago. Kentucky was known for the water, the limestone water in this region.
There's only one limestone shelf in the country, and it's right in the middle of Kentucky.
You got to have that hot summer months where that bourbon can go out into that wood and age. And in the wintertime, you got cold where it extracts. That barrel's got to breathe. It's got to move in and out of that barrel. If it went in the barrel and stayed, it would never age. Or if it never went into the barrel, it would never age. It'd be just like moonshine.
If you go too far north, south, east, or west, or even go out of the state of Kentucky, you really start changing how your whiskey starts aging.
When bourbon first started out, it started out just as a way to, whiskey and to convert the corn, excess corn, into something that wouldn't spoil and that you could sell for hard currency.
To get cash, you had to render your excess grain, your excess corn, into a product. It started out as a side product. It wasn't why they were raising their corn. They could just raise so much corn here that they could not. The surplus was so great, you couldn't afford to transport it back to where the population centers were, which was on the East Coast. And it served as a substitute for cash. We didn't have national banks, we didn't have standardized currency. It was more a trade-based world.
The first tax that was ever levied in the new country was on distilled spirits. The farmers were making, and a lot of them rebelled. The rebellion didn't last long, and after the rebellion, many of them moved to the western frontier. which was Kentucky or Tennessee or Indiana.
The people who settled Kentucky were distillers. They came here to plant grain. They found that the grain that grew the best was corn, so they were immediately distilling from corn, which was not unheard of, but not that common.
The Scotch-Irish came here because Patrick Henry, governor of Virginia, first governor of Virginia, was giving away free land. And he just happened to set the courthouses up inside the limestone shelf, 2 of the 3 of them. So the people settled around the courthouses because that was easy. And lo and behold, what they found was they were making better whiskey here in Kentucky using corn than they were rye back in Pennsylvania.
Sometimes when their crops weren't able to sell or they had excess corn or whatever the situation might have been, producing bourbon or spirits might have been a lifesaver for those folks.
Historians say certainly in the very first year of the settlement of Harrodsburg, whiskey was being produced because it was vital to society. It was medicine, it was exchange, it was keeping grain from spoiling. It was just part of life.
As people expanded west, they brought with them everything they needed. And this included stills.
The still was one of the most tangible pieces of real estate these families owned. It was something that, the first son would inherit. And you see that in deeds and you see it in wills.
But if you grow corn, especially in a frontier environment, you're limited to the number of things you can do with it. And distilling it was one of them, and distilling it was good because it preserved it and so on and so forth. Even though corn's harder to work with than these other grains, it took a lot of perseverance to distill from corn.
The frontier life was a very harsh one. It was working from sun up to sundown, clearing fields, planting fields, harvesting fields, taking care of livestock, slaughtering livestock, building fence rows, whatever it took. You worked from sun up to sundown. And when you got up in the morning, you were still sore from the previous day. So what would you do? You would start with a little shot of whiskey to help ease the aches and pains.
Let's not forget that George Washington was one of our country's first distillers. And one of the reasons he became a distiller wasn't because he was passionate about making whiskey, but as the next general, as the next president, when he retired and went back to Mount Vernon, he knew that every soldier in the cavalry got a daily ration of whiskey. And he saw another income stream. So he hires a Scotsman by the name of James Anderson who makes his whiskey for him, but he has those contracts and he sells it. Dams and bridges and canals that are built all feel the same way. You attract people through whiskey and saying, this is an incentive for you to come here.
Social gatherings were the thing. And you would gather at your local tavern, or you would gather at a barn raising or a cabin raising or a wedding or a funeral, and someone would bring a jug.
But the whiskey then started being traded and it was shipped on rafts, generally in the spring of the year when spring rains, the creeks would rise and be able to float the rafts down to the Ohio River, down the Ohio River to down to the Mississippi, down the Mississippi to New Orleans.
New Orleans is a French colony. What are they drinking? They're drinking French brandy. What makes French brandy different from our American whiskey? It's been aged in charred barrels. Has been since the 1400s. Let's age our whiskey in charred barrels to make it taste more like French brandy. And when they did, people started buying it.
In some ways, that's the most unusual thing about bourbon, about American whiskey. It's the only type of distilled spirit in the world that must be aged only in new barrels.
2 Frenchmen come from the Armagnac region of France, came to the United States in order to set up trade with New Orleans. They built a mill and a warehouse at the Falls of the Ohio. They had an ample opportunity to buy whiskey cheap as people would unload their flatboats into the Tarascon Brothers warehouse and wait for the river to rise. And I think they're the ones that actually started putting it into charred barrels and letting it age and then sending it down to New Orleans, which the trip to New Orleans itself would aid the aging process as the whiskey would slosh through the barrel, increasing the interaction between the oak.
That was made in Bourbon County, Kentucky, but it was a good corn whiskey. People began to ask for this, and the barrels that were going down there had a big B on it for Bourbon County.
The legend has it that it's named Bourbon because of flatboats bringing this whiskey down from Maysville, it had invoices of Bourbon County. Now, the problem with that is that there was very little legal trade, and you don't invoice illegal trade. There's also the fact that the first mention of bourbon is not to 1821. Now, by the 1820s, you start having steamboats making the trip between Pittsburgh and New Orleans. You have these steamboats making the trip that instead of becoming a 9-month or a year-long trip to New Orleans and back, it's a 3-month trip. Now, you're on that steamboat and you're returning home. And you go up to the bartender and say, you know, I really like that whiskey I was drinking in New Orleans. Give me some of that whiskey was getting off of Bourbon Street. Give me some of that Bourbon Street whiskey, or eventually just give me some of that bourbon whiskey. The bartenders on these steamboats are going to start to make sure they have it. And as the steamboats ply up and down the Ohio, Mississippi, Missouri rivers, they're spreading the word of bourbon. Going down the Ohio River by flatboat, or even getting to the Ohio River, you know, you would take your flatboat and you'd put it in the Kentucky River or the Salt River or the Big Sandy River or whatever and float it down to the Ohio River, then float down the Ohio River to the Mississippi and on down to New Orleans. This is a long and dangerous trip. You had Native Americans in the 1770s and 80s and 90s on both sides of the river who were willing to remove your goods and your scalp, because your scalp was worth a lot of money to the British up in Detroit. But once you got down there, you sold your goods. And you sold your flatboat, because you weren't going to try to row that flatboat back up the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. You had two choices. You could catch ship in New Orleans, or you could walk back up the Natchez Trace. And when I say walk, yes, you could ride a horse. As a matter of fact, legend has it that's where the horse industry in Kentucky comes from, is that once they made these trips, if they were going to come back up the Natchez Trace, they would buy the fastest horse they could get, because once again, it was a very dangerous trip, because you had Native Americans and bandits willing to separate you from your cash and your scalp. So if you had a faster horse than anyone else, you had a better chance of getting away.
Bourbon spread on the rivers. I don't think there's any question. It didn't go upstream so much until later. The steamboat is responsible for spreading the bourbon culture as anything. This product got to be popular, and all of a sudden you could start sending it up to St. Louis, or sending it up to Minneapolis, or sending it down to New Orleans.
Without steamboats, taking our product in the 1800s down the Ohio River to the ports in New Orleans along the way, we would not have the bourbon increases that we did.
The river made Louisville a town. The steamboat made Louisville a city. And it was the steamboat era and steam technology that revolutionized America and went into trains and went into interurbans.
So it was the early highway system. When you did trade, it was much easier to float things down these rivers than it was to try to haul it back over the mountains.
I think a lot of the farmers started adopting the lessons of technology.
The early guys were limited a lot by the technology that was available to them. You started to see some progression towards innovation in terms of flavors and taste profiles. I don't mean flavorings, I mean flavors and taste profiles of bourbon, and trying to do things a little different there.
It's not the chemists that come up with it, it's the guys who just want to try out something a little different. Try a different grain, try something different, try to age it a little differently, try it on the top. I think that sense of innovation has marked that industry very, very well.
During the Civil War, the armies sought out whiskey as medicine as they went from the distillery to distillery.
The Union Army came through Kentucky on their way to fight major battles, fell in love with the liquid, and after the war was over, they decided they needed some more, and they placed orders to buy some.
There were incredibly popular pharmaceutical drugs, and some were patent medicines and some were straight. But what we forget is, like, the Civil War produced something like 400,000 morphine addicts, because they used morphine as the only painkiller. But the only other painkiller was whiskey. You had this kind of post-Civil War America. And as those folks aged and went away, the acceptance of alcohol as a benefit to your health, there's a reason why we say to your health when we give a toast. It is seen as a healthy thing. It was certainly seen in those days as a curative.
Every war that the United States has fought, with one exception, has been paid for by a whiskey tax. You know, the Whiskey Rebellion tax was created to pay for the Revolutionary War debts. When we went to war with Britain again in 1812, in 1814, they brought back the whiskey tax in order to pay for it. It was eliminated after 1817. It comes back in 1861 to pay for the Civil War.
Anytime you get a big demand for whiskey and it becomes more expensive because of taxes, you see these big companies that want to make it cheaper. And back then, they were just making what we would call Everclear or vodka today and adding prune juice, cherry juice, tobacco juice, iodine for color, and slapping the word whiskey on it.
I mean, it was terrible. And some of this stuff had no age on it at all. It was just Nutri-Grain alcohol with shoe polish in it and maybe a little sorghum or a little bit of honey to give it a little bit of flavor.
Well, that didn't sit well with some of the distillers in Kentucky, so they got together, they passed the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897.
It was really the first legislation in this country that guaranteed the quality of a product and set standards for a product. It's very, very specific.
Not only does it have to be a minimum of 4 years old, it has to be exactly 100 proof in the bottle. You have to list the distillery that it comes from, and it can only come from one distillery. It must be from one season, so it's like a vintage, if you will.
They started putting the ingredients right on the label by law, and it said 50% alcohol, 100 proof.
So the first consumer protection legislation in the history of the United States doesn't have to do with the safe labeling of our food, as the Pure Food and Drug Act. 9 years later, in 1906, it was about whiskey.
Bourbon is responsible for the Pure Food and Drug Act, and bourbon is responsible for trademark and trade name development. In fact, brand name comes from a federal law that required the heads of barrels to be stamped or burned with the brand name.
When they started putting in whiskey in bottles, when they started selling it by the bottles rather than just barrels of whiskey, that really gave a reason to put the producer's name on it.
But what's so interesting then, the federal government was directly involved. They had the regaugers. Every time you knocked the bung out of a barrel, there was a guy from the alcohol tobacco tax, and they were there to make sure that none of the employees were taking it and that what came out of the barrel went into the bottling process.
American whiskeys are by far the most restricted whiskeys in the world. You have Scotch, Irish, Canadian, they have restrictions, but nothing's restricted like American whiskey. And then you have Bottle and Bond, which is the most restricted of the most restricted whiskeys in the world.
I think the major players in bourbon history, like Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr., welcomed taxes and welcomed regulation so that he could set his bourbon apart from the rectifiers.
So they had to finally say, this is what bourbon is. And that's when they defined it to be 51% corn. Has to be distilled no higher than 160 proof. It can't be put in the barrel any higher than 120.
This had a huge effect on the straight whiskey industry up to Prohibition.
Prohibition is a peculiarly American experience, and you know, they did refer to it then and still do as the noble experiment.
America was undergoing a huge cultural change at the end of the 19th century into the early 20th century. Population centers were moving from rural America to urban America.
And the people the abolitionists and women's suffrage movement and the prohibition movement were all the same movement. It was all the same people and just sort of advocating for each thing in turn.
What changed and really brought about this was when they shift the emphasis from drinking alcohol to the saloon.
Come the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution, and people are going into factories, and right outside every factory is a street full of saloons where they would all go on lunch hour, and all of those saloons gave free lunches. They would have a buffet, and sometimes very good, and the food was all free, but you had to pay for the liquor. And the belief at the time, which to some extent was true, was that the typical laborer, the typical working man, would basically drink and gamble all of his earnings, and nothing ever got home to the family.
This led to a lot of backlash against the saloon. The Anti-Saloon League was saying, Saloons were dens of evil where not only drinking, but gambling and prostitution were going on. But the real reason for not liking the saloons was more political than anything.
You had these images coming out of the cities of corrupt Irish saloons that are running political machines, and German beer gardens on Sunday afternoons where people got out and drank beer. They weren't home praying. They were playing music and singing and having fun on a Sunday afternoon. There was a Prohibition party, a political party, and for 70 years they were the third largest political party in America. The movement just kept growing and growing, and it became politically, especially in rural communities, it became politically smart to identify yourself with the Prohibition Party. They began to take over a lot of states. Most of the South, before Prohibition, most of the southern states were already dry.
Prohibition was voted in Maine in the 1840s, and then back out, and then back in. And it would go into different states, and it may last 10 years and go out.
When the bill came up to vote, it was nowhere near close. It was 171 to 34 in favor of Prohibition. Kentucky was the third state to ratify the amendment. We were already, 105 of 120 counties were already dry.
Prohibition passes in a record quick amount of time, and the nation goes dry.
This city lost over 8,000 jobs. The next day in the newspaper, there were 25 distilleries closed. There was roughly 2,000 folks. There was 1,000 people worked in the cooperages. They lost their work. There were about a dozen breweries.
Prohibition really hurt the industry because you had basically 15 years where there was not any production.
But then, like local advertising agencies, people that printed the labels, all of those kind of jobs you don't associate, along with half the crews on the steamboat and roughly a third of the crews that worked on the trains. That's what we shipped.
Prohibition was very hard to enforce. If you had a basement load of whiskey before Prohibition, there was nothing anybody could do about it. You could drink every day. There was nothing illegal about drinking alcohol.
A lot of people think that it was illegal to drink, but it was not. It was illegal for us as manufacturers to manufacture, sell, or transport alcoholic beverages. It was legal, though, if you owned whiskey or liquor before Prohibition, you could still drink that all through Prohibition.
Plus, whiskey was still a very important part of the pharmaceuticals of the day. So you could buy medicinal whiskey.
Speakeasies kind of pushed those laws and pushed everything because of like, okay, if it's legal to drink, I can have friends over to this location, to my house, and I can have people drink.
Oh, well, the speakeasies were, in some cases, they were, saloons closed the door one day and the next day they reopened.
You would go there, you would just want to invite anybody in, so many times they had like a little peephole or a little trap door, and you had to check so somebody had the right password or knew somebody before, because they didn't want the government agents to come in and shut them down.
A lot of times it was a fiction. A lot of times everybody knew there was a bar there.
If they had a bunch of bottles behind the bar and it looked like they were selling it, they had shelves that would drop down and all that would disappear. So all the evidence was gone. And if you stood there with a drink in your hand, that's not against the law. I just had a couple friends over.
There are studies that say that people actually increased the amount of alcohol they drank during Prohibition.
I mean, there was more speakeasies than there were bars before Prohibition in New York.
But that was part of the appeal. I think that was part of the attraction. I think people rather enjoyed breaking the law.
Prohibition could not have happened if they had not passed the income tax amendment. Because before the income tax, the whiskey tax was paying for about half of the federal budget.
Very few of the local police officials or courts really believed in Prohibition, and they enforced it as loosely as possible. But it was a federal institution, and so you had federal agents coming down, often, if not in opposition to the local cops, they weren't getting much cooperation.
Mayor LaGuardia, he was never for the Prohibition law. So he didn't tell his local police and all that. He said, don't bother anybody. And so not every government official was behind this law. So it must have been an unbelievable time.
The government decided they needed to maintain they used this term, a strategic reserve of whiskey in the country. And in 1920, when it started, there were about 60 million gallons put back in reserve, in barrels. By 1927, The strategic reserve had gotten down to about 17 million barrels. They had drawn out that much. And the government realized if we didn't start replacing it, and we were going to be out of it in 4 years. So they issued, I think it was originally 10 that got consolidated down into 7 distilling licenses in America. And these were legal. They go back into operation. Of these 7 companies, 6 were located in Louisville.
We sold whiskey under the Four Roses label during Prohibition, which kind of provided a good segue into becoming a powerhouse bourbon after the repeal of Prohibition.
When it comes back to being legal in 1933, bourbon whiskey is an aged spirit. You can't just, okay, it's legal now, we'll start making it and selling it. It takes 4 years to get a good aged product out there. So it takes a lot of effort for the bourbon to even get reestablished at the end of Prohibition. And just about the time they're beginning to do that, the Second World War comes along and you have wartime prohibition because the industry had to make alcohol for the war.
The bourbon distilleries in World War II, they were required to start making alcohol for the production of neoprene for rubber. And they all put in distillation columns to do that, so they were limited on the amount of bourbon they could make versus the amount of alcohol they had to make for the war effort.
1941, we get into World War II. Folks, we need you to make high-proof alcohol to make smokeless gunpowder and different synthetics for the war effort. So they do that. They get the contracts from the government to make high-proof alcohol to do that. So they did their part. Even though they did get paid for that, they could have made more whiskey and made more money selling the whiskey that they sold. But they did what like everybody did during World War II. You did that.
Every time there's been a war, we've turned to the alcohol and the spirits industry to help fund that war. Every chapter from the Whiskey Rebellion to a Prohibition. Here it is 70, 80 years later, and we're still talking about Prohibition. It was such a fascinating chapter in our history that Kim Burns is doing documentaries on it. Who'd ever thunk it?
But after Prohibition was the industrialization of the bourbon and the whiskey industry, where you had to have a lot of capital to come in and open a distillery from scratch or to bring one back from being mothballed.
Now, you throw on top of this the late 60s, early 70s, a generation that said we're not going to trust anyone over 30 and we're not going to drink what our parents drank, which was whiskey. They start experimenting with products such as vodka and tequila.
Vodka and gin and rum and blended whiskeys, they were the dominant players of the day. And they're a lighter style. So the bourbon distilleries got together and said, well, if people want lighter styles, we're going to make our product lighter. So they take it from the bottle and bonds of the 100 proof and they lower it to 86 proof. So almost every whiskey you see back then in straight whiskey says 86 proof. And then to this day, when you kill something, and it killed that segment of the bourbon and straight whiskey, when you kill something or do away with it, you've 86'd it.
And one of the favorite things we like to tell people is that people say, well, Pappy, why don't you bottle it at 90 proof or 86 proof like all the other distilleries? And he said, well, why ship all that water all over the country? So, you come up with stuff like that, which would be a lot of fun.
The American public now had choices. They didn't just have to drink whiskey.
Bourbon was strong up in the early 70s. And you young people come along, and you started drinking that white goods, the gins, the vodkas, and things like it. And a lot of the bourbon distilleries hurt themselves at that time.
Things start declining, and it gets really bad by the mid-1980s.
Light was better. Everything light. This healthy lifestyle, not against healthy lifestyle, but light, light, light.
And it's only in the end of the 1980s into the 1990s that you start seeing products such as single barrel, small batch, extra age products, creating interest in whiskey again, and the market starting to level off.
And we see something I had thought was gone. Cigars came back. Cigar festivals, big smokes, steakhouses are established. Now we have a number of wonderful steakhouse chains across the country. Red wine became popular. Craft beers show up. Single malt scotch, cognac. All of a sudden, Americans are drinking, eating, smoking big, rich flavor. And that begins an interest in the return to bourbon, because bourbon is rich, elegant, big, compared to the light.
What led to this boom is that it's a boom only because it went so low.
There had to be a transformation. There had to be a modern age of bourbon, or it was not going to survive. So it's two different phases. There's the birth and then there's the rebirth.
The thing that began to turn our industry around back in the mid-late 80s, early 90s was the introduction of premium bourbons and the focus on premium bourbons, premium single barrel bourbons, premium small batch. We as an industry really didn't do that much different, began to point out and showcase how good we were with these premiums.
Elmer knew about Albert Blanton going into the warehouse and selecting single barrels for parties and special guests and things like that. And that concept idea is really what started premium bourbon selections.
I think it was just kind of waiting to happen. I'm guessing that we've taken some of the single malt market, those drinkers, and pushed them over to our side, or they enjoy both of them now.
You know, the only thing I can do is go back to that congressional resolution of 1964 and say that as a result of that, and being a distinctive product of the United States, bourbon could be made anywhere in the United States. And now you've got distilleries springing up throughout the country.
When I started, basically it was a Southern gentleman's drink. The men got off work in the afternoon down south, went to their favorite bars. They got their cigars, their cards, and went to the back room and started playing cards. Now it's become a worldwide drink, and the ladies has really got big in the bourbon business now, all over the world.
I think what happened in the last 10, 15, 20 years has been that a generation came up that didn't know they weren't supposed to drink bourbon.
It seems like there's a lot of younger people consuming bourbon where it used to be kind of an old man's drink.
Bourbon is not just being consumed now by 55 plus folks that are 55 years or older, which is just a very general demographic. We're seeing folks down in their 30s and middle 20s or whatever that are enjoying bourbon as well. So the reach of our demographic is expanding.
Social media and the ability to communicate so easily globally, and for somebody in Japan knowing what we're talking about here.
There were bulletin boards on AOL and CompuServe and those services that also had a lot of bourbon content. So the internet's been very important in terms of people being able to communicate with other enthusiasts.
There's a desire for a return to tradition, authenticity, and craft. And I think bourbon really represents that.
People are looking for, extra aged, different proofs, the stories that are behind these products. Education, I think, is what's made bourbon grow, and people are not scared of bourbon anymore.
I think people who've gotten into it have gotten into it for the same reasons I did, a fascination with the culture, the history.
I really do think that the reason bourbon sales are continuing to grow is because the customers are demanding quality. When they go out and spend their hard-earned money, they've got a $20 bill in their pocket. What is the best quality spirit they can get for their $20?
I think it's how you as an individual feel about the flavor as you taste it is what makes bourbon so unique.
No bourbon is better than another bourbon. Some bourbons are just simply more expensive because less is produced. So be thoughtful of that when you're drinking it. The bottle that costs you $10 can sometimes just be as memorable as the one that costs you $1,200.
There are so many factors that have really come together here that have made bourbon where it is now. The cocktail culture is certainly one of them.
As this mixology culture, this bartending culture is spreading to Europe, where they didn't make cocktails. Now they're starting to in France and Germany. Certainly Great Britain has really embraced the cocktail. And again, you make cocktails with bourbon.
Taste is in, thanks not only to the distillers, but thanks to the regional chefs that we have around the country. The reemergence of the cocktail culture, much of that utilizes bourbon. Then there's the fact that bourbon tastes better than it used to taste.
Madman has been credited both with the cocktail revival and with the American whiskey revival, since so many of those cocktails were made with bourbon and rye.
Cocktails, bars, I mean, it's just kind of like fashion. It's a revolving scene. We had kind of gotten away from the idea of a lot of great tasting cocktails in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. People just were kind of ordering a lot of the same old boring things. And, you know, with mid-2000s bars up in New York and Chicago and San Francisco opening up and starting to do the kind of speakeasy style cocktail, you know, it started to educate people of what's actually out there and, you know, the whole rebirth of the cocktail culture. It's been a great thing for the industry.
It's really nice that the bartenders, especially the working class people in the restaurant industry, have attached themselves to what I believe is a working class product and brought it really back to the forefront of being really incredible whiskeys.
It's not just for an older palate. It's young people enjoy bourbon, and they're drinking it neat and straight, and obviously cocktails also. But a lot of people that start drinking bourbon, you know, they're not just mixing it with Coca-Cola or whatever. They're having it on some ice or just putting it in a cocktail and so forth. A good cocktail.
The old-fashioned, for example, has become a drink of choice of the next generation, from what I've heard. And it started originally as a Pendennis Club here in Louisville.
When you go to a bar, you've got a creative bartender that wants to make a good cocktail for you, so you'll come back to his bar. He's not going to give you an inferior spirit, or at least he shouldn't if he wants you to come back.
I think it's kind of funny and foreign almost to bartenders around here because we're used to just drinking it with a shot and a beer and, you know, maybe an old-fashioned or a Manhattan, but not getting too busy with the cocktails we make. You know, we really enjoy it in the pure form.
That's why we're seeing this huge surge in visitorship. We're hosting twice as many visitors this year as we did 5 years ago. And we believe that 5 years from now, it will double again. And that's energizing. It's a hell of a lot of work. But when you get to do work better than it's ever been done before, and when you get to connect with people that are so energized by what we do, that's pretty inspiring.
But now it's gained such momentum with things like the Bourbon Trail and the Bourbon Festivals.
In 1999, the distilleries were really looking at ways to promote Kentucky bourbon because we had just come off of the immediate downturn and we're trying to start ramping up the single barrels and small batches. They looked to see what was going on in California and wine country and Scotland with the Whiskey Trail and said, you know, we've got this great number of distilleries right here within a few miles of each other in central Kentucky. Why don't we create a tourism experience around that? So the Kentucky Bourbon Trail was born that year.
This whole Bourbon Trail, I think it's caught people by surprise. I mean, we're talking something like 700,000 visitors a year. And just here during the Speakeasy program, the people that I have come through who are doing all 8 or 9 of the stops now, it takes 3 or 4 days. You don't just, you know, they're not located all side by side. They're all over the central part of the state and here in Louisville now.
And now, you know, 15 years later, we're getting 600,000, 700,000, 800,000 visitors a year, and it's truly one of the hottest tourism attractions in the country.
I think the Kentucky Distillers Association and the Bourbon Trail has had a huge impact economically on a lot of areas because of the distilleries as they build visitor centers and hire people to work in those visitor centers.
The Kentucky Distillers Association is a nonprofit trade group that was actually founded in 1880 when about 32 distillers got together and pretty much decided they were tired of paying taxes, or at least high taxes. So they met in Louisville, the Golf House, and formed a trade association and have been working together ever since.
They help with many things. They help with the lobbying and all that, the business of the business.
The programs that we have put in place as an organization to market our category, specifically the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, the Passport program, have been invaluable to the success of our industry.
And we're coordinated and work together to make the pie bigger, to promote bourbon tourism, to promote the defining elements of Kentucky's culture, which bourbon's a big part of that.
Of course, the individual brand companies are responsible for themselves. We're responsible to promote and grow Woodford Reserve. But having a partner like the Kentucky Distillers Association certainly makes it a lot easier in some aspects of this modern world.
Bourbon's a tremendous investment for the Commonwealth of Kentucky because the spin-off factor is so high. Just a couple years ago, for every bourbon job that was created, another 3 jobs were created down the line, and that's a cooperage or trucking, hospitality, a whole number of industries that have now kind of become niche markets for the bourbon industry.
It supports almost 16,000 people in the state of Kentucky. This is from farming industry, transportation, logistics, storage, packaging, labeling, manufacturing, just your operators from fermentation into distillation. So it's really turned into quite a big driving force.
It's the people who serve it in the bars and the people who are driving the bus that takes you to the distilleries when you buy that tour.
All these industries are coming to Kentucky, and it's having an incredible impact, especially in the local communities where you've got locally sourced grains now, farmers' impact. You've got, some distilleries even growing their own malted barley rye. I know the distilleries talk about setting up cows and having cattle as a side business. So, yeah, it's a great investment for the Commonwealth.
We spend a lot of time developing relationships with the farmers, on a day-to-day basis. So we actually go visit these farms. We talk to these guys that are growing corn for us.
That's what you do. You stick with your partners. I mean, like the folks at Independent Stave. They've been making barrels for 100 years. The Boswell family, they've been connected with us here at Beam for all that time. And, they make a good barrel. We use their barrels. Their barrels make our product what it is. We know when them trucks come in with their barrels, we don't have to worry about the barrels. That's the least of our worries. Same way with Vendome.
There's one company in Kentucky, it's Vendome Copper and Brass Works, very well known in the spirits and the brewing industry for their copper works.
Yeah, the still, that's the backbone of the distillery. I mean, that's where you take the beer, run it through that, and it turns it into the White Dog. I mean, it separates the alcohol from the beer.
If you want to buy a still, you want to buy from people who've built the largest stills in the world for the largest and most successful bourbon companies in the world.
They make very big stills, 72-inch diameter columns, all the way down to small 50-gallon pot stills.
They built a couple of our stills. They're one of the best. They've got a lot of history. It's kind of the same thing. They've got a lot of history and legacy in the business. They got a lot of expertise, and they do a pretty good job.
You got a problem with your still, you talk to them, and they help you work it out. They know beer stills.
You know what you're getting when you go to a group like Vendome Copper and Brass Works.
They're extremely important players, and they're respected all over the world for what they do, and they're the best at what they do.
They've really come into a very niche market. On the craft side, it's really a booming enterprise right now.
About 10 years ago, we started to see just a little hint of these micro distilleries, these craft distilleries starting out. And while at that time we didn't quite know where that might lead to, we thought that there might be a little bit something there. And sure enough, probably 5 years ago or so, it really started hitting me.
And I think the craft distillers here have thrived because the bigger distilleries are here, and vice versa.
I think that a lot of people have just gotten into the bourbon business with all these craft distillers. And I don't know how many are going to be around in 5 or 10 years, but it's a great, fun business to get into, but it does take deep pockets if you're going to put whiskey down for years and years and years.
The craft guys will tell you, I would hope, and I believe they would tell you, that the industry has embraced them and done everything they can to make sure they survive. I mean, this session, the big distilleries were helping us get a bill passed to reduce the craft license fee, so the craft distilleries didn't have to pay as much as they did. Because, $3,000 a year is what the distillery license is in Kentucky. And that may be nothing to Jim Beam, but that's a whole lot of money to somebody just starting up when they could spend that on corn or advertising or brand building or something like that.
And we've created a tour similar to the Bourbon Tour and the Bourbon Trail for the smaller craft distilleries. And it is now taking off, and it is starting to attract a lot of visitors to our state.
The small distillers, the micro distillers, have not made a dent in volume. They're still so small that the volume that they contribute is meaningless. But in terms of the share of mind, they've been hugely important.
But each one of them must think they have something that recommends them. And so I think these people that do this have all got to be fairly adventuresome and believe that they're going to produce something that's superior to the other 149 brands.
Most of the craft distilleries that started here in about 2010 or 2011 are now on their first or even second expansion phase. So they're doing something right. And it's also a good pressure valve, especially from a tourism standpoint for the bigger distilleries, because now if you go to a big distillery and there's an hour or 2 hour wait, there's probably a good chance that there's a craft distillery within 10 or 15 miles away that they can go visit and then come back and visit the bigger distilleries. So the craft distillery gets the benefit and you don't have angry people waiting around a big distillery trying to get into a tour.
They're selling very small volumes, but they've made a huge difference in terms of what people are talking about, what people are thinking about, what people are buying and tasting and trying, what they're seeing when they go into the stores. So suddenly there's just a lot more excitement about the category.
It's going to be a great supplement and support for the bigger distilleries, and it all goes together, and they're all working together. That's what's so great here is they all realize, both large and small, that their success depends upon all of them promoting what is great about Kentucky, and that is Kentucky bourbon.
You know, I don't think there's any other industry in the world where competitors within the market are such close friends, truly, not because somebody's talking to us or we're in front of a camera.
Not another business in this world that can come close to the camaraderie shared by not just within a distillery, within a plant, but within our industry.
It amazes people how the bourbon guys, we're always together, giving each other a hard time or sneaking up, trying to, pull somebody's ear or do something. And Jimmy Russell's always sneaking up on me, grabbing a hold of my ear or something, telling me, straighten up, boy.
If you ever go to the Bourbon Festival in Bardstown, Kentucky, in September, you'll see how close all of us are and how we work together. We do anything we can to help each other out.
The need for bonding, the need for cooperation is very important because you all have to watch each other's back.
The sales guys, they're pretty competitive, but the distillers, we're all buddies. We have a lot of fun. We enjoy being with each other, and we do anything in the world for each other.
Most of the big guys, they're open up your arms and say, come on, guys, be a part of it. And we want you to succeed just like we've succeeded.
If anything in the world went wrong in distillation, if a distillery lost a pump or a motor, and if we had it, we'd lend it to them in a heartbeat and just to keep running.
I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to call Maker's Mark and ask him a question, or talk with Chris Morris over at Woodford Reserve or anybody. And if they needed a piece of equipment, for example, and we had it and we could spare it, we'd loan it to them, never ask a question about it.
In 1996, we had a catastrophic fire. This destroyed, it was heat lightning that struck one of the rick houses. And there happened to be 70-mile-an-hour winds that day, and it spread from rick house to rick house. And by the end of the day, there were 7 warehouses on fire.
They lost 7 warehouses, and the first thing we all did, the other 7 distillers, let us know what you need, how we can help, because they put a big hole in their inventory.
Our distillery's burned down. What are we gonna make? We've got to make whiskey tomorrow. We got employees, we got people with families, with kids. We want to make whiskey for them. We lost 100,000 barrels.
We all stepped up to help them immediately. We were making bourbon for them, selling barrels, doing whatever we could do to help them.
We made our whiskey on their stills for 3 years until we got our new facility in Louisville, Kentucky.
I think every one of us feel is we are all in the same boat. We're producing an American spirit we should be proud of that, and everybody gets along really well.
Well, we all know each other. We've known each other for years. A lot of us have been in the business a long time.
When we add a new distillery to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, we just did that with Stitzel-Weller, the historic Stitzel-Weller distillery in Louisville. And there at the announcement, you had representatives from every distillery there cheering them on. I mean, where else are you going to see that in another industry? That your competitors are there congratulating you and applauding you for success.
We're on the same team, and we help each other, and in turn, the whole industry benefits because of that.
I had no idea how friendly these guys were to each other. And you get the master distillers in the room together, you better get the waiters on pretty deep, because they start cutting on each other and kidding on each other. It could be stand-up comedy. It really could.
I think that the producers, especially at that level, the family members, we get along real well. We even have a secret handshake. I can't tell you about it, but We have a lot of stuff in common.
Kentucky is based on family. Families are very important here, and families are very strong here.
See, there are a lot of families out there that were involved in the industry that played an important role in the industry. The Browns, the Wathans, the Medleys, the Beans, the Dance, the Van Winkles.
The families that started the different types of distilleries, a lot of them are still in the same hands, or there are still family members working there.
We've got our grandson, or Eddie's son, here with us now. Bruce is starting to work for us just now, so he'll be the fourth generation of the Russells working here at the Wild Turkey Distillery.
It does seem to be a generational thing for those established and older distilleries. And even for those that are new, they tend to be branches of those older families.
Some people say the bourbon family tree grows straight up.
You will have fathers, grandfathers, even great-grandfathers working and have worked at the same distillery over the years. It is a big family business, and it's a big family.
We started this, and we now can hand the opportunity down to the next generation, something that I did not have, that I had to start this to be able to hand it off. And so I'm really proud of that, and I'm happy to do that. I hope that they will continue in not just my footsteps, but many footsteps before us.
Beans are the prominent ones now because they're the ones that seem to have survived mostly.
There were beams in almost every distillery in Kentucky. They had been a family that developed the art, figured it out. They would go from distillery to distillery, and that's kind of like a journeyman or a master distiller who would go and solve problems for people.
We have my great-grandfather and my grandfather's notes and recipes, and so I've studied those and see how that works with modern techniques, so it's been a learning experience for me.
The entire industry used to be family tradition, hand-me-down from grandfather to his son, to his son, to his son, and passing on down through family history and learning the process by rote.
I really feel making whiskey, making bourbon, making rye, all these are an art. It's your impression on the product that you want to taste. The product that you want coming off is the taste that you're striving for.
Some distilleries basically use a master distiller in public relations, but at Buffalo Trace, we're a little bit more traditional, and we do a little bit of everything. I'm responsible for production of the whiskeys and anything distilled.
Today's master distillers are rock stars, which I think harkens back to James Pepper and Colonel Taylor and some of the other earlier distillers.
As a prerequisite, we're generally old. It takes a while to get here. You can't go to school to learn to be a distiller.
The sheer amount of technical know-how that is required, it's really stunning. I mean, they deserve what they get because they're putting out it's a volatile product.
It's a combination of science and art. It's the art, I guess, that I love the best. It's learning to use the senses, to sight and smell and taste and touch and just smell and taste, knowing if something's going to be right or not, perhaps a problem with something.
Distiller is interested in making it continually consistent in flavor, quality, and in public acceptance.
When something goes a little astray and not sure quite what it is, and fermentations have a particular fermentation problem, we can easier to figure it out and what caused it, how it happened, and prevent it from happening again, or at least if it happens again, we'll know how to get out of it.
It's interesting that they have applied, massive modern technological advances to what was traditionally a craft. But if you ever get a chance to go down to our plant at Birnheim down 17th Street, go in the control room. You think you're NASA. It's highly controlled, and it's a major manufacturing operation with this kind of this romantic image that we have of it being a rural product. But in fact, when you see it being, really run, when you see a big one really run it, it's impressive.
Probably your biggest hurdle you're going to have to get into the business is the capital expenditure you have to put out. It's very capital intensive.
There are definitely a lot of barriers to entry in this business, not just economic barriers, but getting distribution is not always easy. Getting the funding or the financing to build a distillery is not easy. Not everybody can understand the dynamics there.
You're going to wait 2, 3, 4, 8 years before you start seeing any money come back.
You're not for sure how that thing's going to turn out 4 years from now. So you've got to have a tremendous amount of confidence, in your own production. Or if you're starting out using contract production and you're curating barrels, you've got to know what you're doing there, because the end result can be disastrous if you don't know what you're doing.
These are not just make it today, sell it tonight vodka. This is 10 years old. This is 4 years old. We have to think about this stuff.
Long-range planning, better words for is long-range guessing, and that's a bet. I'm not even sure if the term educated guess is good.
A lot of this business is luck. It just kind of happens, and the way it happens is nothing. There's nothing very scientific or planned about it.
All this whiskey's got to age, and so everyone's looking, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, and trying to figure out, how much they need that far down the road. I mean, that's a tough job.
A lot of people make 4-year-old bourbon, and we make also 4-year-old bourbon. But still, that's 4 years from now. You have to, project the sales and what your plans are.
We only can make a very limited amount. So I know that no matter what I make, there'll be a demand for it.
It's a crapshoot, knowing what to make the most of. It's an educated guess, but right now there's no way to guess that big. I mean, there's no capabilities. We're running our distilleries wide open. All we can get out and get in the barrel.
We've already made our bourbon for 2037. So you say 6, 8, 10. I tend to go 6, 8, 10, 15, 20, and 23. So I've already looked at 2038 on what we need for 2038.
But the aging factor. I mean, if you knew that rye was going to be this, we always made rye whiskey, but not a lot of it because it wasn't a big seller. But like overnight, all of a sudden rye whiskey's the hottest thing going. We've got some, but we don't have as much as we could sell if we had more.
If we'd have known Kentucky bourbon was going to be sold as much as it is and become as popular as it is today, we'd have made a heck of a lot more of it 6, 8, 10 years ago.
It's either going to be too much or too little. You're not going to be right on the money. That's not the way that works. So you have to make adjustments along the way. This year we've made so many barrels for 2037. And as we go, we'll kind of follow the trend and monitor it and see how things go, for the next 23 years.
So you're kind of looking into your crystal ball and trying to keep up with demand, and nobody saw the spike in demand. You can figure a slight demand increase, but when you're getting spikes of 25, 30, 40% a year on products, there's no way to calculate that. If you were that smart, you ought to go buy Powerball tickets.
One of the things from year to year, you always wonder if you're going to have enough corn, and then the price of corn, I've seen it be as low as $1.50 to as high as $8.50, so a bushel. So then there's been years of drought, and then you wonder how you have to go out and hustle a little bit more trying to find the corn, and not only that, but the quality of corn.
If we want something really good in a bottle, we're fighting a battle, uphill battle that can't be won unless we start off with the best raw materials.
The only speed bumps typically you'd have with any kind of distillation system is going through the bureaucratic hoops that you have to sometimes, both with alcohol, tobacco, and tax trade bureau or the state.
I submitted a request to the LRC, Legislative Research Commission, that we form a Bourbon Trail Caucus made up of members in the legislature, Senate and House, who represented a county where bourbon was produced. The Bourbon Trail Caucus was formed specifically to advance the bourbon industry in Kentucky in as many ways as possible.
It's been a great partnership with founding families of the industry and the companies that have partnered with them.
You're not going to find a better corporate citizen in Kentucky than a bourbon distillery, quite honestly.
I do a lot of charitable events. Eddie does a lot of charitable events. Anything we can do to help out any community in charitable events and all, we'll do that.
It gives us a great feeling to be able to donate something to charity and give back to the communities.
Brown-Forman gives millions of dollars every year to the arts community in Kentucky. Nobody's done more than Bill Samuels for education. He raises money for education efforts and the Heart Association and everything else.
It's not just about bourbon, it's about trying to give back to the Commonwealth, which has been so good to all of us.
Heaven Hill, Four Roses, all of them. It's fantastic. I mean, they really, truly care about Kentucky.
They have continued to hire, and we have doubled that workforce just in the last 2 years.
So that means more jobs and more tax revenue coming back to Kentucky, which means more corn purchased by local farmers, which means more money for education, which means more good paying jobs here, and just, keep that path flowing.
The average salary is $90,000 or a little more than $90,000 a year, and that's a great salary for anybody raising a family.
And I think that lawmakers across the state, even those in conservative areas, are welcome to the aspect of us growing this industry and building bourbon as not only something that's part of our heritage, but it's something that's going to be a strong part of our future, in particular our economic future.
I think that's because more and more legislators, despite the constituents that they have, are coming to understand that bourbon is the signature industry for Kentucky.
I think that everybody in every part of Kentucky recognizes the importance of having a strong bourbon industry, and our laws reflecting that.
We generate a whole lot of money in tax revenue. About 60% of every bottle of bourbon goes to taxes and fees of some kind. There are 7 different taxes on every bottle before it ever reaches your lips. And 2 of them are what's called the ad valorem tax. We call it the barrel tax here in Kentucky. For every year that barrel of bourbon is aging in a warehouse, it's taxed. Part of the reason why an 18-year-old bottle of, let's just say, Elijah Craig is more expensive is because it's been taxed 18 times while the product evaporates. So we pay a lot of money in tax revenue.
Kentucky, unfortunately, is one of the most heavily taxed liquor taxes in the country.
The taxes that we pay on those aging barrels almost overwhelmingly go back to fund local education. And that's $12 to $14 million a year and growing, because it's based on the number of barrels we have in Kentucky.
Not only has bourbon brought new attention to the alcohol laws, which are fairly outdated in Kentucky, but also it involves tourism and other aspects of economic development and improvement. So as the bourbon industry is booming, it's creating a lot of issues that we as lawmakers need to address.
A few years ago, there was a big trend in some New York bars where they were vaporizing alcohol with devices and trying to get a high that way. And as soon as we heard about it, we went to the legislature and immediately passed a bill that banned those in Kentucky.
Bourbon's made to drink and enjoy. It's not made to get drunk and do these things with. It's something you sit down and sip on, enjoy the flavor and taste of.
I mean, when we were into our NASCAR and IndyCar racing, one of the big programs we did was our drivers. We went in college campuses in the areas of the tracks and talked to the kids and said, hey, practice drink smart, drink responsibly. That's what it's all about.
I don't think the distilleries get enough credit for what they do in responsibility measures. I mean, they're all doing multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns to, think smart, drink smart.
We practice what we call drink smart, which, we always say, if you're not old enough to drink, don't.
As a bar owner, it's always right there that, hey, you're responsible for the people you serve drinks to. I don't think anybody would want to feel responsible for some kind of horrific accident to one of their friends or to a stranger. Doesn't matter.
It's our job as producers to make sure that we adhere to the guidelines that our own industry has created. We've done a great job of creating advertising guidelines and other guidelines that ensure that we don't advertise in front of people that are underage or put ourselves in situations where we're exposing our product needlessly to people that aren't of age to consume it.
Our products are meant to be used the way they're supposed to be, not abused, because it's like anything. Too much of anything is not good. And we want to make sure that people who use our products use them correctly and make sure that, we don't cause any problems.
And I think one of the most important things about the new generation of bourbon connoisseur and the new customer of bourbon, particularly in Kentucky, is that this is a new generation. And while bourbon has been around a long time, people are enjoying bourbon in many different ways, and I think we're being more responsible as a new generation of bourbon drinkers.
I take it very seriously, as a first responder, as a father, and just as a citizen.
As alcohol education has improved in this country over the course of the last 40 years, you find a more responsible drinker for the most part, particularly in Kentucky when it comes to bourbon.
The bourbon industry right now is on a big incline. We're still growing worldwide. I mean, it's not going to die anytime soon. It's not going to ever die, I don't think.
This century so far, it's been unbelievable growth.
Because, people overseas are just discovering bourbon. And so, they're just on the very beginning.
Bourbon industry is on fire, not only domestically, but globally.
So think about the world's population is significantly larger, especially people that can afford a drink. And then bourbon's market share compared to Scotch is still quite small. So the future for bourbon is quite bright, and I think the industry is going to continue to grow.
It's growing greater than we even anticipated. And I'm not talking about a business so much as it is the emotional standpoint of bourbon as an entity in the state.
I think there's a lot of upward growth in terms of the numbers of people that are going to visit Louisville, visit Kentucky, and go to distilleries.
I honestly don't think the bubble will burst. I think this is a legitimate trend. I don't think it's a fad.
You always wonder, when is it gonna, end? I don't see it ending anyway soon.
I think that the bourbon industry is definitely here to stay.
We've been around for a long time and we're not going anywhere, I don't think.
We're sitting on more bourbon barrels right now, over 5.3 million. That's the largest inventory since 1977. We filled 1.2 million barrels last year, which was our highest production year since 1970. We're literally making it as fast as it's selling. There are some distilleries that are having shortages or even temporary shortages just because the demand is so great. So, we're all kind of racing right now to invest in double operations and capacity and build new warehouses, and it's kind of chaotic, but that's part of the uniqueness about bourbon. You can't just make this stuff overnight.
We got more bourbon stored in the state of Kentucky than we do people now.
There's going to be a lot of great whiskey to be tasted in the next 10 years. There's going to be a lot of cool bottles coming out.
And the industry will stay true to its values of quality and authenticity and this unique American heritage.
It's a uniquely American product, and we embrace that. We love it. We love the role that it plays in our social lives.
I just think it's a tradition. People love that around here. They're very proud of things like that. So I think it's just a thing that kind of binds this area together.
That makes me sort of proud that there's an industry that has really come back from the death knell to the popularity that it has today.
Bourbon and whiskey is truly an American drink. And being in Kentucky where it was founded, bourbon was founded and everything is just a great, fantastic thing for the state.
Bourbon for Kentucky is just, it's part of the soul of the state. It's, it came with statehood and it's been here ever since.
It's impossible to imagine Kentucky without bourbon. It wouldn't be Kentucky. You wouldn't even be able to call it that. We'd have to call it something else. It's impossible to imagine.
Bourbon is part of our history and our heritage and who we are as a state. And that's mainly because of the people in the industry and the people who have come up and helped make bourbon what it is since our inception.
And a lot of the people that are here have moms that have worked here, dads that have worked here, grandfathers that have worked here, and they're just kind of carrying on a tradition. And I think people feel that when they're here, and they understand kind of the weight, the fact that the things that you're doing today are for products from 10, 12, 15 years from now.
It's something that's withstood the test of time. It'll be here, been here forever since the United States, and it's going to be here. It's not going anywhere.
You enjoy your bourbon. You sit and you relax, and it's many things to many different people.
Bourbon adds grace to your life. I don't understand people that drink vodka or the neutral spirits. I don't want the neutral. I want the spirit to have some character that I get to borrow for a little bit.
There is no bad bourbon, you know. There's just a difference of opinion.
There's so much to learn and so much to find out, and I think we're actually in the frontier of what bourbon is and what it can be.
It's a proud time to be a Kentuckian. There's nothing quite like Kentucky bourbon. Kentucky bourbon built Kentucky, and Kentucky built bourbon.
Bourbon is for all seasons and for all people.
To me, bourbon can be described in 2 words: uniquely Kentucky.
Bourbon's American, and I think it's something that's been there forever, but people are rediscovering how great it is.
I'm glad we didn't cave. The mountain came to Muhammad, they all came to us.
Love it.
Grandpappy made whiskey way out on the hill with corn mash and sugar in an old copper still. He made his living outside the law. Only aged 3 days, man, that stuff was raw. Times have changed and the old still is gone. We're still making whiskey, but it's bottled and bought. Now it's much smoother and no longer wrong. Aged in oak barrels and complies with the law. It's a family tradition, 200 years old. You call it whiskey, we call it gold. It's always been good, but it's finer each year. Good old Kentucky bourbon, sweet angel tears. Good old Kentucky bourbon, sweet angel tears. Sweet angel tears, like old rock and rye. Grandpappy's whiskey from days gone by. It's covered in taxes, but still made for you. Call it what you like, it's good old Mountain Dew. It's a family tradition, 200 years old. You call it whiskey, we call it gold. It's always been good, but it's fine.